All right, guys, welcome to week 5. We will be talking all about the grant budget and how to create one this week. A grant or program budget is not your organization's operating budget. A grant proposal budget is specific to your proposed project or program. This budget outlines what your intended expenditures would be if you were awarded grant funding. The grant budget is an important piece of your grant proposal because it shows the grant maker exactly what their funding will be used for. While making a compelling written justification for your funding request may be valuable, having a solid budget outline will paint a clear picture of your intentions. The grant budget will also be where you list any additional costs and funding sources that are outside of your grant proposal. This can show how you intend to fully fund your project if it extends beyond the scope of what the current funding request is. A grant budget is helpful for both you and the grant maker. It will set you up to launch your project with an anchoring financial plan, making management that much easier. And when it comes to time to report out your grant activities, you'll already have established funding categories and expenses. So how do we begin constructing this program budget? All right, so developing a program budget, there's 4 basic steps. So when developing a budget for a grant proposal, you can kind of think about it as being similar to developing a personal budget. For example, while personal expenses might include rent, mortgage, utilities, bills, that sort of stuff, a program or project budget includes expenses such as salaries, marketing, and other costs that are necessary to run a successful program. The following is a simple list of stages that are necessary to develop a program budget. The first step is to review, research, and organize budget requirements and information. The second step is to actually develop your budget. The third step is to review, update if necessary, and then review again. And the final step is to develop a budget narrative that outlines all the information that you see in your budget and what is important. So that first step, the budget requirements. Before investing too much time into developing the budget and selecting a budget tool, it is important for you to read through the grant application and determine what is actually required. Funders often provide or specify a document that should be used to capture a budget, as well as identify or list specific information to be included. There are several important items to consider in the grant application guidelines before developing your budget, and those may include the template with instructions indicating whether or not it's mandatory to use that form, other instructions on the specific budget categories or the level of budget details. Another thing that you should look at, or if it includes, or if certain items should be included or not included in a budget. And finally, are they requiring you to have a budget narrative or not? After that, you need to do extensive researching and collecting estimates for your revenues and expenses. You need to know how much is it going to cost to perform this task. And so doing really good research and having as close to what the cost might be is important. Remember that all budgets are good faith estimates, but a best guess is going to be based on solid research. If you're thinking that this process sounds time-consuming, you're absolutely right. The second step is to actually develop the budget. So when developing a budget, you need to decide if you're going to use the provided budget template, or you can make one out of a good old spreadsheet. But you will need to identify the budget period. So every budget has to have a beginning and an end period, and that is called the budget period. The budget period for a program will be maybe one of these 3 things. So the organization's fiscal year, the program year, or the grant period. So for instance, a budget period may cover January 1st to December 31st, or it might include a 3-year period, or it might just include however long your project's going to take. You need to make sure to indicate that. Next, you need to identify all revenue and expenses that you would like to include in your budget. At this point, most revenues and expenses will be estimates and should be documented as such, but sometimes you'll actually know what the revenue and expense amounts will be, so if you know that, you need to make sure to include that as an actual. So what is revenue? Revenue is income identified or already committed for programs such as memberships, fee-for-service, other grants, fundraising endeavors, such as special events or individual giving. Depending on the program, your budget may contain several different types of revenue streams. A list of potential revenue sources should be included, and those might look like other foundation support, government funding, or individual funds. You might also have things like in-kind donations or volunteer labor or services. Those should also be listed as revenue sources. You want to also identify your expenses. So expenses are the cost of those items required to sustain the program. They are a critical piece of the budget because they identify the cost. Make sure the budget that you have is consistent from year to year if it's over longer than a 1-year period. And you might want to include adjustments like cost of living, general service increase, or product increases. Expenses can be recorded into 2 categories, direct and indirect costs. So what are they? Your indirect costs are also known as overhead costs, and these costs are shared within an organization or with another program. So some examples might include rent, utilities, general operating expenses, and salaries not tied to a specific program or project. So for example, an indirect cost might be how much it takes someone to fundraise, or it might be a printer that the entire company uses. A direct cost are costs that are required to carry out the program or project. Examples include direct labor, program materials and supplies, and equipment. They are typically itemized and can be traced directly to the project that they support. Calculating direct costs should be fairly simple, especially if you are developing a program budget that is new for the organization. So a direct cost might be if you have a specific staff member who works on a certain project or program, that is a direct cost to that program. Or if you buy a new piece of equipment for that program, it's an example of a direct cost. Many organizations operate programs using a combination of paid employees and purchased goods and services, as well as volunteers and donated goods and services. These donated goods and services and volunteer time are also called in-kind donations. And in-kind donations are considered support and are a vital part of the budget process and should be included in both revenue and expenses where applicable. In-kind contributions should not be ignored or taken lightly during the budget process. There are a number of benefits to including these items in your budget, including reducing the overall cash outlay for program expenses, expanding resource capacity to sustain the organization's program or project, open doors for community partners to learn more about your organization and support your project, demonstrate to funders the value of the donor and volunteer contributions. There are a number of factors that should be considered when estimating these costs. For instance, volunteer and staff estimates can be calculated using the average amount an organization would pay someone providing the same or like service multiplied by the number of hours they are performing that service. On the other hand, new product or service costs should be calculated based on the market value of that new product or service. Used products should be estimated based on the depreciation or resale value of an item. So in-kind donations are extremely important to make sure that you are putting on your budget sheets. Sometimes grants require you to have a match component, so you need to show that in your budget as well. Matching grants kind of in the simplest terms, are grants that require the applicant to provide funds in addition to the grant award. The applicant is matching the grant funds with their own funds. There are many options when it comes to matching funds. Most matching grants will clearly outline the types of match funding that they will and will not allow. So the different types of match, cash match are the most common type of match and are the easiest to track. Cash match is either the grantee's organization providing funds as part of the general revenue, or cash donations from a non-federal third-party organization, so partner organization, or by non-federal grants. The cash match contribution is an actual cash contribution. In-kind match comes by leveraging staff and resources already in the organization. Grant applicants are often able to quantify staff and resource value as an in-kind contribution towards match requirements. In-kind match can also be included as evaluation of goods and services provided within the grant program. The third type of match is donations. So donations provide a cash on hand to meet the requirements of the matching grant. This is simply others giving as part of a match. Volunteer time, so similar to the in-kind staff allocations, if you are able to use volunteers, you may be able to quantify their hours as part of your match requirement. And finally, you can use other grants as match. There are times when other grants may be able to provide the required matching fund of a matching grant. Some refer to using grants in this manner as braided funding. You are weaving together a variety of funding streams to pay for the project or program. Leveraging a variety of grants to fund a project is a viable option. However, you do need to consider any grant restrictions that may prevent supplementing or supplanting existing grant projects. So now we'll move on to step 3. So you've done your research, you've created your budget. Now let's review your budget. This stage in the budget development process is fairly common sense, but yet is often misstepped. You need to review your budget for formula and number errors in logic. Essentially, grant seekers should take the time to review the budget from the perspective of the funder. Revenue and expense items that appear out of line with the overall budget should be identified and resolved. Grant seekers should also look for budget items that are questionable or outside what is customary for similar programs. Once the final review has occurred, a clear and concise explanation of items in the budget should be provided in a budget justification, which will be step 4. But first, let's look at an example of a program budget. So this is one that we actually used for housing assistance. We were applying for the John William Pope Foundation. So you can see here the income items listed on the left-hand side and the expense items listed on the right-hand side. So this is a 1-year budget. We were asking for $100,000 from this foundation, and you can see a lot of other sources listed. So we have other grant sources listed and any sort of income listed. On the expense side, you can see how the $100,000 we're asking for breaks out into salaries and wages and construction and material overages. And you can see the other sources listed that pay for other line items in the expense section. The example budget that I provided you for this week as a template for your assignment is very similar to this one. So if you have questions, reach out. So step 4, the budget narrative piece. This is the last step in creating a budget document for your grant. Now that your budget template or spreadsheet is complete, the numbers are reviewed and verified, the budget narrative should be developed. This document provides a narrative explanation of the revenues and expenses that require greater explanation of how the expenses and revenues were derived and why they are needed. It also shows that there is sufficient thought put into why the grantee believes the revenue and expenses are what is noted in the budget and explain any significant variances. Without a budget narrative, funders may not know the importance of a specific budget allocation. So you can kind of see my funny here. The budget narrative is typically documented in a descriptive format and is presented as a supplement to the budget. While it does not have to be a dissertation of explanation, so it doesn't need to explain every line item, it should be clear and concise and explain those items in the budget that require further clarification. So some helpful tips for budget development. Although the degree of specificity of any budget will vary depending on the nature of the project and agency requirements, a complete, well-thought-out budget serves to reinforce your credibility and increase the likelihood of your proposal being funded. Keep in mind the following. A well-prepared budget should be reasonable and demonstrate that the funds being asked for will be used wisely. The budget should be as concrete and specific as possible when it comes to its estimates. Make every effort to be realistic and to estimate costs accurately. The budget form should be as clear as possible. It should begin with a budget narrative, which you should write after the entire budget has been prepared. Each section of the budget should be in outline form, listing line items under major headings and subheadings. And finally, each of the major components should be subtotaled with a grant total at the end. So you might be thinking, well, my budget is an estimate. Should it be inflated or deflated? It's critical to base your budgeted expenses on true cost of your project requisites. But pulling numbers out of thin air will lead to confusion and tally errors. So make sure you find costs of all particulars from trusted sources and quote them accurately in your budget. Avoid overestimating your budget as it may repel the funder. As you know, something is better than nothing, so stick to the narrative of your research and align the budget of grant proposal to it. Subsequently, it is important to keep in mind that a very low budget will also raise eyebrows. Thus, make sure your request is reasonable. So that is it for the overview for this week. I have provided several examples of a program budget and budget narratives. One of your required readings will go over how to write a budget narrative. You have a weekly discussion forum, post an initial and a response post. And your writing assignment this week is to create a project budget for your proposal. You may use the provided template, or you can create one of your own using Excel, whatever you like to do, that's fine. Office hours this week are Friday from 3 to 4, and all of your assignments are due April 24th at 11:59 p.m. I hope you have a great week. Please reach out with any questions you might have, and we'll see you next week.